Jon Pertwee, Katie Manning, Roger Delgado. They're in it.
They are definitely in it.
I'm Tom Dickinson.
And I'm Louis Midas.
And this is the Cloister Room,
a podcast about Doctor Who and other things.
This was Roger Delgado's last one.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
So they just kind of wrote him out, I guess. Or they did. Well, no, they didn't even write him out. They just kind of left it, and he just didn't come back.
Well, he was intended to appear in this. This is from Jon Pertwee's second to last season as the Doctor.
Oh, okay.
And he was intended to appear in the last Pertwee story, which we've watched, is Planet of the Spiders. There was supposed to be a story called The Final Game, which would have been like the last story with the Master, in which the Master would die, and it would be revealed that the Master somehow is the Doctor, like he's a future incarnation, or he's a part of him, his evil side come to life or something like that. But the Master would end up dying in a sort of ambiguous gesture where it seems like he might have redeemed himself to save the Doctor, or something like that. But before that story was even really outlined in any great detail, Roger Delgado died in a car crash in Turkey.
Right. Yeah, so that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, it was a pretty big bummer, and I know everyone was very upset about it.
Well, yeah, and wasn't Roger Delgado like good friends with Jon Pertwee?
He was, and so I think one of the things that you often hear about the last season is that it's got kind of like a downer mood because by that point, Katie Manning, who played Jo, had left and was replaced with Elizabeth Sladen, who played Sarah Jane Smith, who obviously, is great as well. But it was sort of like the team broken up, and yeah, which it is very disappointing and tragic. And they didn't do anything with the Master again until The Deadly Assassin. Several years down the line with Tom Baker. And that's where you get the sort of decrepit, corpse-like Master.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I feel like, that's probably... It's probably a better idea that they sort of didn't do anything with the Master for a while, because that would have been kind of weird if they had just, like, recast him. Especially because Roger Delgado is just so good.
Yeah, he's really good. And I love it in this story that... there's a lot going on in the story before he shows up, but then when he shows up, this story sort of it kicks it up a notch. It's so exciting, and it's like, oh, now there's even more to love. I like this story a lot, and you haven't said whether you like it, so I don't know. Do you?
No, I really did like it, and well, and because sometimes six-parters kind of get old, and I didn't really find this one getting old so much. It was just sort of dragging, and I certainly like it a lot better because I kept on thinking like, well, this is all leading up to Planet of the Daleks, and so I was kind of wondering, I was wondering how it ended up with the Doctor getting shot. Of course, I could definitely, it's not hard to imagine. So, but I was also just kind of interested to see, just to see how this was going to change my perception of Planet of the Daleks, and not that it really did change it all that much, but it was definitely. Because I was thinking of Planet of the Daleks when watching this, and, it was definitely more interesting than Planet of the Daleks was.
Well, the stories don't have all that much to do with one another.
No, they don't. No. And I had sort of remembered, you saying that going in, and I also remembered that these were considered to be like one big long story by some people. So I was kind of trying to look at it from that angle, but no, I think as a story on its own, it does sort of, I think it is really good. It's really interesting because, you know, there's this sort of like political drama going on, and then like, you know, then there's at one point where, you know, the Doctor's in prison on a moon colony, and then like he's got to break out of prison, but then he doesn't, and then that's when the Master shows up, and it's like just all this stuff is going on. And it really covers a lot of ground, and there are a lot of different, you know, locations and places they travel to, which is kind of weird to think about, because that's not something that really happens with New Who all that much. And you know, so it's kind of nice to see. No,
you often have like stories that are fixed in one place, and this is very much a sort of like galaxy spanning story. And it does keep things very interesting, especially considered that almost everything that happens in the story is just a variation on the Doctor getting caught and put in a jail cell and then breaking out of it. That happens so much in this story. It always happens a lot in the classic series, especially. But I think this story has to like take the cake. It's I don't know. In the first episode alone, he's like thrown in a cell because they think he's a Draconian. And then he gets out, and then he gets thrown back in a cell by the Ogrons, and then he gets out, and then they're like, he's a stowaway, throw him in the cell, he's helping the Draconians. And that's just the first episode.
Yeah, that's true. There's really no character in this story who isn't throwing the Doctor in jail, you know, even after, you know, the humans throw him in jail several times, and the Ogrons throw him in jail. Even later on, you know, even the Master gets in on it, and he's throwing the Doctor in jail. And it's a lot of the Doctor being thrown in various jail cells.
But for me, it never gets old.
No. Well, and, you know, it's always a different jail cell. And, you know, he's always got to get out of it in a slightly different way.
Or sometimes the same jail cell multiple times, but for different reasons by different parties.
Right, exactly. Right, you know, they really covered a lot of ground with this jail cell motif. You know, and just every possible combination of jail cell circumstances and, you know, parties involved. It's great. I had expected the Master to show up because I knew the context of Planet of the Daleks. I knew he was shot by the Master, so I knew the Master had to be in this story. And I guess that this is something that's maybe more common because it was the same kind of thing in Colony in Space, where it took a while for the Master to even show up, you know, and it wasn't until I think like the third episode.
I think it was the third.
Yeah. So it was, you know, there was a good length of time where the Master just was not there, and I feel like that kind of works better because whenever I watch a story where I know the Master is, if it's like the Anthony Ainley Master, it's not so much a question of when he's going to show up. It's more like, okay, who could be a really poorly disguised Master? And just trying to figure out which character looks like he's wearing a lot of makeup or something and seeing if that's going to be the Master. But, you know, it seems like more often for Roger Delgado, he's not really wearing disguises at all. But even if he is impersonating someone, it's mostly just a mystery when he's actually going to, like what episode he's actually going to appear in. Because sometimes it takes a good long while.
It's funny, though, because, you know, this story, we've remarked multiple times on how similar the name is to Colony in Space.
Right.
And in both stories I think they might be the only two Delgado Master stories that aren't set on Earth. I'm not 100% sure about that. But in both of them, you'd think I'd remember, but I don't. In both of them, he shows up in the middle of the story, not just impersonating a government official, but actually is a government official. Like someone who has through some means of some kind of legitimacy infiltrated the government and is there to wreak havoc on the Doctor.
Right.
Although in this case, it's almost kind of a coincidence that the Doctor and Joe just happened to show up.
Well, yeah,
in the middle of his plan. Whereas in Colony in Space, they were kind of sent there by the Time Lords.
Right.
So it's kind of crazy that he just happened to, like, the Doctor's greatest enemies, the Master and the Daleks, are cooking up a scheme together, and the Doctor just happens to show up there.
Yeah, you know, that's true. And it's actually funny that the original plan was to make the Master be or it be hinted at that he was a future version of the Doctor, because then that would sort of that would sort of retroactively explain, like, oh, maybe he knew where to be in the right time and place so that he would run across the Doctor. But, obviously without that explanation, it doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, it's completely coincidental. But yeah, and that's the thing is, I was expecting the Master, but I was not expecting the Daleks. And, so when they showed up, I was...
Even knowing that this led into Planet of the Daleks?
Well, but you yourself said they were unrelated. And I mean, is there any evidence that these are the same Daleks?
They are, because I think, like, the war that the Daleks are trying to provoke in this story, I mean, they're kind of related, in that the war they're trying to provoke in this story is the war that they're trying to gain an advantage in the next story. They're trying to amass an army.
I see.
In Planet of the Daleks.
Okay. So, okay, I can see that then. But I mean, at first it didn't seem like there was a reason why the Daleks should be. And I mean, I was wondering, because I think at one point the Master says he's being employed by someone to use the Ogrons to provoke this war.
Is this the first time you've seen a story with Ogrons in it?
It is. What other previous episode have they been in?
Well, they were introduced in Day of the Daleks.
Okay.
And they're sort of this enslaved race that hangs out with the Daleks all the time.
Okay.
I guess you might say.
Uh-huh. So they're kind of like those like pig humans from, Daleks in Manhattan.
Basically, yeah.
Okay. So, and that's something that even the Doctor mentions at one point, I think, is that I
think Joe mentions that last time they saw the Ogrons, they were working with the Daleks.
Right. And then the Doctor, I think, said something like, well, yeah, but they'll just work for anybody, so it's not like the Daleks are going to be involved. And that was a good enough explanation for me. I was like, oh, well, yeah, obviously the Doctor's not going to say something stupid, so he must just kind of know, like, well, we don't, these Ogrons could be anybody's Ogrons. Yeah, it doesn't mean that there are Daleks involved. And in my mind, that just sort of shut off the possibility that there could be Daleks involved at any point. So I guess it's my own fault for believing the Doctor. No, I was completely caught off guard when there were Daleks. But I also liked, and I don't know if I've ever actually seen the Master interact with Daleks, like at all.
I'm trying to think of another story in which it happens, and I can't.
But yeah. And I loved at one point where he was kind of like mocking them. I don't remember what he said, but he said back. He didn't say it to them, but like after they left, something they said to him, I forget, it was something kind of like threatening. He just kind of like mumbled it back under his breath. And I liked that. Because, the Master wouldn't take that and wouldn't put up with these Daleks who are just, whatever, these tin cans.
Certainly not.
Really watching other versions of the Master really makes me appreciate Roger Delgado, because he's just, he doesn't have that over-the-top kind of, and I know we've said this before, but he just doesn't have that over-the-top kind of villainy feel to him. He actually feels like he's, this evil dude who's just gonna have these schemes and just do crazy stuff.
It just seems to me so much like Anthony Ainley is just trying to rip off Roger Delgado, but he just hasn't got it.
Right.
Whereas I think that John Sim works pretty well, because he's very much doing his own thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that Jeffrey Beavers does a good job as well. Mm-hmm. I really like, and you can do a good job with the Master, but I think if you're much like with the Doctor, if you're just trying to imitate someone who's done it before, that's not the way to do it. Right. And luckily, no one's ever really tried to do exactly that with the Doctor.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's funny because when Patrick Troughton took over, there could have been a real possibility that he would try to do that. He would just try to imitate William Hartnell. Not that would have worked out very well, but I'm glad he didn't.
Yeah, they could have just decided this is just William Hartnell with a few years taken off. Right. This is just what a young William Hartnell looks like, which would have been a little hard to sell, but they could have tried it. But they went in a completely different direction. And I think when they finally recast the Master in The Keeper of Traken, they probably should have taken that under consideration.
Yeah.
And I mean, Anthony Ainley is perfectly likable when he's playing Tremas, but he just devolves into a Roger Delgado parody.
Right, right. And that is kind of strange. And I mean, I wonder why they felt to take it in that direction. Like, I wonder if they were maybe trying to go for that. Like, they thought, like, well, we miss Roger Delgado, so let's bring back his character and have that guy have whatever actor plays him just do like kind of an homage to him. But because I mean, at that point it's been firmly established that every incarnation of the Doctor is his own person. So how come? And it's you would assume that every Time Lord is that way. So there's no reason for that to happen unless we can explain it in canon by saying like, oh well, the Master himself was feeling kind of nostalgic, so he wanted to feel like he did back before he got all corpsey, and so
I think nostalgia is really the reason the production team tried to make it that way.
Well, there you go.
Because I'm sure they were kind of nostalgic for like the 70s when, hey, the show had much higher ratings than it has now. People liked it more than they do now.
So they were nostalgic for high ratings.
Yeah, basically. Or they were nostalgic for like everyone liked the Master, so let's bring back a Master that's just like that version of the Master. And in hindsight now we can see that was wrong. And Jon Sim basically, some people may disagree, but I think Jon Sim basically proved that was wrong. That no, you need to reinvent this character just as much as you can reinvent the Doctor. And Big Finish has done a good job with that too, using the Jeffrey Beavers Master. They also have their own version of the Master that they have created recently that works pretty well and is very different from any other version. So, yeah.
Well, there you go. And yeah, and I think, and that's kind of the cool thing is you've got this, every time the Master regenerates, he can be a different kind of villain. And that's kind of cool and exciting. So he can take the form of any villain he likes. He can be that kind of crazy, off the walls kind of type where he's just, you don't know what he's going to do next. Or it could be the scheming mastermind who just, has these really long plans that just, these tangled webs and whatnot.
Even Derek Jacobi didn't fit into either of those as well. He was very much his own Master for the very brief time he was on screen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It'd be cool to see more of the Derek Jacobi Master. Wonder what he'd be like.
Yeah, it would be hard to justify that narratively.
Well, yeah.
Why would that stop them?
Well, yeah. And I mean, certainly if people really, really want a mini-series with the Eighth Doctor, then I'm sure they can think of a reason to have a mini-series with the Derek Jacobi Master. Or I'm sure there are people who want it. Not that either of those two things would ever happen. At all.
I bet Derek Jacobi wants it.
Probably.
I don't know, maybe not. I don't know, but
maybe we can fuse these two ideas together, though. We can have the Eighth Doctor face off against Derek Jacobi, or the Derek Jacobi Master.
Yeah, but then why wouldn't the 10th Doctor recognize him?
It could happen in some kind of. There could be like a mind wipe thing or something. That
usually works.
I think so. Yeah. Or maybe just like, the War Doctor was the War Doctor for so long that he can't really remember
Derek Jacobi.
Exactly.
Anymore.
Right, exactly.
How did you feel about the mind probe?
They kept bringing that up so much, and then it was really building it up, like, okay, are they gonna, like, they keep talking like, I'm gonna use the mind probe on you. If you don't tell me what's going on, I'm gonna use the mind probe. And then they finally showed the mind probe, and I was like, wow, I'm seeing the mind probe.
I don't know if it's the same mind probe from the infamous line from the Five Doctors, though.
Well, right,
it may not be the mind probe. It may be not the mind probe. Not the mind probe.
Right. Well, because I feel like, I'm trying to remember how the context of it within the Five Doctors, because
it's deployed in a very similar situation. Like, but why would this piece of Gallifreyan technology? Unless maybe the Time Lords just really liked the mind probe as seen here in the Earth and Draconian empires, so they just took that.
Yeah, they're free to do that. I don't think any patent law is gonna stop them. I'm just trying to think, because the specific mechanics as they explain them in this story is that, like, if you tell the truth, it doesn't really hurt you, but then if you lie, it does hurt you.
Well, I think it's more that it I think it works like a truth serum as well as like it's a thing that compels you to tell the truth, but also it's possible to resist against it, but it would really hurt you.
Okay.
So I don't think it's just like a physical pain reinforcement, like, because that's just regular plain old torture interrogation. I think there is something sort of more, to use a Harry Potter analogy, veritaserum ish. But yeah.
Well, and that makes sense. Well, and overall, if you sit a person down at a machine and tell them, listen, this machine is gonna listen to what you're saying, and if it detects that you're lying, it's gonna hurt you. Otherwise, you'll be fine. I feel like that would be enough to compel a person to just start spewing truths. I mean, I don't know.
Well, some people resist interrogation, so.
Well, yeah, and they suffer pain. But yeah, and so the mechanic that the doctor breaks is that it has to process this as being true or false, and somehow it can't reconcile how ridiculous the truth sounds versus if it believes them. Actually, I don't really understand how that works now that I'm thinking about it. Because surely one of those systems is not required if you've got the other. Like if you need a machine to figure out whether something could be the truth, and so it has to process, it has to go through just a list of probabilities to figure out if any of these things could possibly happen, then I guess that would, I guess there's value in that. But if you're already doing that, why would you need to figure out if this person is, if this person believes that they're telling the truth, which is what I assume the other half of the machine was doing, was figuring out if this person was actually was saying what they thought was the truth, even if it's not actually the truth.
I don't know.
I guess the point would be to not cause them pain if they think they're telling the truth, because that would just be cruel and possibly counterproductive.
Could be.
I guess I don't understand the mind probe.
Well, it's broken, so. I like the doctor's story about the purple horse with yellow spots.
Yeah. That was that's not an actual episode, I assume.
Sadly not,
because that'd be
Big Finish needs to get working on that.
Right. That'd be a good one.
How did you like the Draconians?
I mean, from what, a costume standpoint, or
costume, character, just concept.
Yeah, they seemed interesting enough. Kind of, it's I don't know.
Yeah, they're kind of a fan favorite.
Really?
Yeah, I think I really do kind of like them because there aren't a lot of alien civilizations in Doctor Who.
That's true.
There are a lot of monsters and things like that, but you don't really get so many. This is an alien civilization, but they're pretty clearly they're foreign in their ways, but they're not evil.
Right.
And they do seem like they're very I don't know, Japanese or something. They're trying to stand in for some, real world Asian culture where I think Earth is meant to be basically Britain, and the Draconians are sort of meant to evoke a sort of Asian thing. I don't know if I'm misreading that, but that's how it seems to me. But it's just it's sort of it takes the sort of international relations thing and just blows it up on a cosmic scale in a way that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's true. And it is something that I thought of was kind of how this actually, it was kind of weird because it sort of reminded me of I don't know, Star Trek or something, where you do have these multiple races that are, more or less, peaceful, and they're all kind of coexisting. Although I don't know enough about Star Trek to just talk about Star Trek, but
Nor I.
Right. I know that at some point there's more or less a kind of truce between, or God, I could be fucking this up, but there's some kind of truce between the Federation and the Klingons or something. And so it kind of reminded me of my own possible skewed memory of Star Trek. And so, that was kind of a thing. But yeah, it does seem like very often in Doctor Who you sort of get these races who are just all evil, and they are a a villain, and there's just no, the humans are at war with them for a reason, or there's a reason to not root for these guys, but there's really not. It's really not like that. It's not like that here, and they are an actual race who are just out there doing their own thing. And
the entire war stems from a misunderstanding that's cultural in nature, because General, what was it, Williams?
Yeah.
He thought because they were sending I guess it was some kind of battleship, or some kind of ship that is usually armed. He thought that was an act of aggression, when it was just ceremonial. It would be like if you saw like someone who was carrying a ceremonial sword, and you thought that they were threatening you in some way just because they happened to be carrying something that looked like it was a weapon and kind of is a weapon. But so it was a very I don't know, like the entire reason for the war is not because these are evil monsters who have some sort of hatred for humanity because it's nice and emotional or whatever.
Right.
It's just a big misunderstanding based on a culture clash.
Yeah. I do have to say, though, that was a little weird to come out at that point. Like, this war happened, like 20 years ago. And at no point did, like, historians want to find out how it started. And, like, so there was a lot of attention in, like, academia or something, like, sort of picking apart, okay, what was it that caused this war to start? And I don't know how long after World War I they sort of figured out, like, it was Archduke Ferdinand who was like that caused everything, and that was the powder keg or whatever that set off the chain of whatnots and everything. But it just seems kind of weird to me that, like, this is the point where they finally figure out why that first war started.
And they're very quick to General Williams is very, very quick to just believe that.
Well, he's right. Like, it's kind of like it just like dawns on him, and he's like, "Oh shit, I've been wrong this whole time."
If this were happening in the real world, it would be something like, "Well, you can't prove that, and it's not documented, and we've got historical sources that blah, blah, blah." Like no one would like agree about that in that circumstance. It would be a big issue, and there'd be news stories, and everyone would take different sides.
It'd be like how you could get people who are on Davros's side, for like, well, Davros wasn't that bad.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's very strange that just sort of happened right then and there. That we sort of, and I mean, like, obviously it's pretty cool that we got this sort of little mini history lesson as to why this war between the Draconians and the humans broke out. But at the same time, it was a very sort of, I don't know, awkward way for it to happen, on screen. But it did help to completely make General Williams suddenly understanding for their plight, and and helping to move the plot forward. So that was nice. And I have to say, like, I really was interested in where the story was going and stuff. Although I feel like towards the end there were some things that I think were kind of left that weren't really explained all that well. And I know that they sort of, like, there was that sort of monster that attacked the Ogrons or whatever at the end.
I think some stuff got cut.
Okay, that explains
that monster.
Okay,
because I mean they see the image of it.
Yeah,
and Joe remarks that she saw Ogrons worshiping it or something.
Right.
But like none of that has anything to do with anything.
Right.
I believe that the director just didn't like the monster prop, so they kept its inclusion to an absolute minimum. It was really kind of strange looking.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it did look kind of bad, but for the brief glimpse that we saw it. But I also thought it was weird how, they saw that sort of painting or whatever, and they sort of, like, they were on their way to do something. I don't remember at what point this was. I think they were trying to like escape or something. Mm-hmm. And then they like stop and was like, "Hey, look at this painting."
Let's
and then
talk
they like
about art.
Right. Like, this doesn't seem like the best time to do that.
Well, the BBC is a public service broadcaster with a mission to inform and entertain and educate the public. So you had to have that brief moment of culture. Just like how in early Doctor Who it was supposed to be educational. Maybe they're putting a little bit back in there, like, oh, now we're talking about like cave paintings and indigenous peoples or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
That's got to be it.
It has to be. It really
I feel like the story reached a point where a lot of the stuff that I thought was most interesting about it kind of fell away, and then it was just like fighting some Ogrons and some Daleks. Because what I really liked was I liked the whole, the political aspect of it, and it had kind of like an espionage kind of feel to it, and like the notion that the Doctor and Joe were like the only two people who knew what was right, and how to speak truth to power and stuff like that. And there are all these really interesting aspects of it. But that kind of all it all resolved itself, and then in the end you were left with, a rather standard just this is how we introduce the Daleks, and the Daleks are going to be all evil and stuff like that. And I thought the last episode maybe let the rest of it a little bit down, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I would probably say that as well. But yeah, as I was watching the last episode, I was still kind of just reeling in shock with the revelation that the Daleks were in this. So I feel like that sort of, I wasn't really paying attention to how all the stuff was kind of just not it was how it had that sort of like, I don't know, shift in tone where it was no longer about the political intrigue or whatever, and it was more just like action-y stuff. But yeah, I think that last episode kind of is not my favorite part of this serial.
My favorite part of the serial was...
Oh, what?
It was the scene where Joe was just talking and talking and talking, trying to distract the Master. He was just reading a book and just kept turning her down, and she just is going on and on and on. Yeah, I thought that was really great.
Yeah, that was pretty great. Yeah, I liked that too. Joe has this, this really good weapon up her sleeve, which is just to annoy people. And
it starts with the Doctor doing it, like he's explaining the events of the war games to her.
Right.
But then it transitions to like her just like talking on and on, like the thing about the Brigadier is this, and then I'm always doing all this work at Unit HQ, which I don't really like very much. And you should really be nicer to the Master, because the Master's really, he just wants to share global domination and galactic domination with you, and maybe you should just put up with it and like understand that you've lost. And she just goes on and on, and it's pretty incredible. The Doctor uses what he refers to as his ultrasonic screwdriver.
Well, right, yeah, I noticed that. Was that just a case of like the writers hadn't used this prop in a while and forgot what it was called?
That could be it.
Or is this supposed to be a different screwdriver from his sonic screwdriver?
Well, it could be, because this one is implied not to usually be able to work on bolts. Whereas the sonic screwdriver, as seen in the new series, can work on anything but wood.
That's right.
Although it could be that this screwdriver doesn't work on bolts, but here he gets it to work on bolts. So maybe he's gradually improving it, and eventually the only thing it can't do is wood. But he's beefing it up over time.
Yeah. So maybe he could just be going through like a phase where he's calling it ultrasonic to indicate that it's more powerful, but then he eventually just kind of gets tired with it and just like ultrasonic is too hard to say. I'm just gonna say sonic. Sonic is kind of catchier. Anyways.
Could be just a line flub. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it did seem like there was a line flub that I picked up when they were at the, because I don't expect that to happen in Third Doctor era, because I feel like that was better edited. But I think that there was when they were having a conversation, and this is obviously not at all interesting, but I feel like I gotta say it. But when they were in the prison and they were discussing, God, I don't even remember what it was, but it was the Doctor talking with that older prisoner guy who he tried to escape with.
Dale.
Yeah. And something he said sort of, I don't know, I feel like he sort of flipped it, but maybe it was intentional.
Do you remember what it was?
I don't, and I realize that means this is really uninteresting.
Well.
Yeah. So there you go. But yeah, no. But yeah.
The discontinuity guide might know. The discontinuity guide does not seem to know. Okay.
Maybe it was actually...
It does have multiple other goofs in this episode, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For instance, in General Williams's past, if both humans and Draconian ships had arrived unarmed, what did he do to destroy the Draconians?
I didn't realize that. Maybe it was... maybe he, used his own ship as a battering ram. Or they ejected some fuel cells or something.
Could be. Humans
are pretty resourceful when it comes to weapons.
The Draconians have never been seen before or since
Really?
on TV. Yeah.
Oh, so maybe this is going to be like another...
Like the Zygons.
Zygons, that's it, yeah.
Well, yeah, you never know.
Could whip out the Draconians for the 100th anniversary.
I think they're a little bit too similar in concept to what the Silurians have become.
That's a good point.
So it's almost not really all that necessary, but
Yeah.
Big Finish did a couple things with them, and so did the novels.
Did they do anything? Was it more just political intrigue, or were there actual...
They never, like, devolved them into monsters, but there's a lot more, like, dealing with them as an alien civilization. The Draconians and the humans at the end of this story, they team up to fight a war against the Daleks, and that war rages on and becomes part of the backstory of the character Bernice Summerfield, who is a major character in the Seventh Doctor New Adventure novels. Who's basically the quintessential version of the novel companion.
Interesting. I also liked that there was no chocolate allowed on the moon colony. That guy just kind of took it away from him.
Yeah, I like the moon prison colony a lot, personally.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I feel like it was a nice little detour that didn't amount to anything.
Well, right. Yeah, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun when the Doctor's just this prisoner. Obviously, he's a prisoner a lot, but this was like a legit prison.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until just now that I realized how little that added to the story. It just got the Doctor, out of the way and gave him something to do. This probably could have been a 4-parter.
Right.
But I'm fine with the 6-part version of it. So.
Well, right. Yeah, and it was still a lot of fun.
I thought it was kind of interesting that the exterior architecture at the Draconian embassy, it looked very not alien. It looked very much like a 1970s office building.
That's true. That's a good point. Maybe that's just like, well, when a country builds an embassy, when they obtain an embassy, do they like build it to their own standards, or do they just take whatever building's available?
Well, I don't know.
Because maybe the Draconians were trying to fit in, and so their architects just kind of thought like, well, I don't know, we're on Earth, this is probably Earth-like design. Let's build this office this way. And then they didn't realize that they were looking at architecture from the 1970s, and so they didn't realize that they're not up to date with like the most recent, Earth architecture.
Hey, also, you know what I thought was cool? I thought it was cool that there was a lady president of Earth.
Yeah, that is pretty neat.
And it's a role that very much could have been played by a guy, but it just wasn't. They just had a lady that was fairly progressive for the 1970s. So, good job with that.
Yeah, I was actually kind of wondering about that. Is if that was common, because I know that like nowadays, it used to be that whenever they wanted to have like a sort of sci-fi setting or a futuristic setting, they'd like have like a black president, and now that's a reality. So, or it is in America. I shouldn't be so America-centric, but so now in order to do like the future, they'll do like a woman, or at least it's really either or. They'd either do a black president or a woman president. But yeah, so I was kind of wondering where that started, and if that was a common thing in the 70s for sci-fi.
I suppose I wouldn't know for sure. There are occasionally roles like that in Doctor Who where this person is played by a woman, where it could have been a man or a woman, and they just made it a woman because why not? But they're not all that common, and I just thought this was a pretty good example of a fairly strong character who is given quite a lot to do and given a lot of power. And I thought that was also the sort of the president's dilemma was one of the interesting parts of the story for me. So it was very cool that they did that. So
yeah. I did like her. I liked her character. That's true. Like, and that is, and I mean, there was a lot of different stuff covered in this story, and so the president did have like their own kind of little arc, and they were involved and important, and and so that was real cool of the 1970s to give us that.
Good job, 70s. There was also a little bit of like seeing how people on the street are reacting to things. not by showing it, but it's referenced.
Right.
Like, you have, like, that. There was some point where the president, I think, was watching something on TV.
Yeah.
There was, like, some American person who was talking about how you need to go to war with the Draconians. And that's very much something that they did a lot of in the Russell T Davies era.
That's true.
But you don't see it quite as much in Classic Who, so it's kind of a standout thing here.
Yeah, and that sort of adds, like, kind of a realism to it, where you're sort of seeing this at all levels and from all different perspectives, and, you know, that's a neat thing to do, and it makes it seem more real. Because, you know, there's nothing, obviously there's aliens and stuff, but, you know, all of this stuff could actually happen, you know, with just people on Earth, and so, you know, it's sort of adds to this sort of realism that, you know, yeah, everyone's got an opinion about this sort of conflict, and, you know, they're gonna share it.
It kind of does happen on Earth.
Yeah,
like you have all these, you know, powers that are poised on the brink of war, and that's kind of, you know, how it was in the Cold War era.
Yeah.
So that was a situation that would have been very familiar at the time. So it's kind of echoes of the real world in fiction.
Yeah. How about that?
And just like in the real world, the two sides of the war were being played by the Daleks. The Daleks were orchestrating the whole thing.
That's right.
Probably.
Just like that. Something you always got to be vigilant of is, are we being manipulated by the Daleks?
And most of the time the answer is yes.
Yeah, well, obviously, yes. That, or, you know, lizard people or Illuminati or one of them.
Shall we pick the story that will be watched after The Frontier in Space?
I think we shall.
The random selector is being fired up. Its randomness is looming or something. It is working through its random process of determining random selection. And the story is The Power of Kroll.
Okay. Which Doctor?
The Fourth Doctor.
Ah.
It is part of the Key to Time season. Another sort of, I think it's the second to last one.
So this must have a lot of, or maybe not. This must have. Does it have more continuity than the Pirate Planet?
I don't think so.
Oh, well.
I think just in each one they're just trying to get a segment of the Key to Time.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is the 5th segment out of 6.
Ah.
It's certainly the power of Kroll.
Is it Kroll with a K? Is that how?
Kroll.
Okay, that's what it was pictured as in my head, which is surprising because I very rarely get those things on the first go. But okay, so it's definitely Kroll's power.
Yeah.
Is Kroll a person?
Well, I can't tell you that.
Oh, okay. Wow. No, obviously not.
I will tell you, though, that K9 is not in this story, but John Leeson, who plays K9, is in it in an on-screen appearance.
What?
Instead of playing K9.
That's crazy. Does he sound like K9?
Only sounds like John Leeson.
I don't think I've ever actually heard John Leeson speak outside of the voice of K9.
He doesn't sound exactly like K9. I mean, he doesn't have a high-pitched voice that speaks in like a monotone.
I guess he wouldn't. I guess it's unreasonable of me to expect that of him. But well, all right. I guess I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it also features 2 actors who are frequent performers in the classic series of Doctor Who. Philip Maddock, who you may remember from The War Games. He played the Warlord. The guy who looks like Steve Jobs.
Right. How could I forget?
And John Abineri, who was in several stories, none of which we've watched for this podcast yet. So this is the first one.
Well, okay then.
So this will be your introduction to John Abineri.
I'm excited.
You should be.
I can't imagine how I wouldn't be.
The power of Kroll. Kroll. That is chanted.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. I was wondering if I was wondering if you that was something you just.
No, I was just trying to get up a random chant.
Well, right. You know, it's always good to try that every now and again. Well, I can't wait. It sounds exciting.